What we're talking about today is ACCE's The Social Costs of Carbon report that came out in January of this year, the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity. And it's one part of a sort of large social cost of carbon literature that has been developing. Just part of that literature is shown here. What's interesting here is that most of the literature is very focused on assessing the social cost of carbon, and this report raises the legitimate point that it also makes sense to potentially look at the social benefits of carbon. In cost-benefit analysis, you don't just look at the costs; you look at the costs and benefits. And so I thought it was worthwhile to take a look at the report and see how they were doing it, because some of the publicized results suggested some interesting or some rather extraordinary results. The report has been talked about in a couple of blogs that you can look up. The Smog blog on February 6th and NRDC's blog on Laurie Johnson's blog at the end of January both cover the report and talk about it. I'm going to give a little more information here, some more graphics, and also take a look at where the report came from. So basically what this report is arguing is that fossil fuels are responsible for industrialization and have had huge benefits for the world, and there's really no question about that. A lot of the report or quite a bit of the report is sort of making that case. And where they go with that is really interesting in terms of saying that fossil fuels are highly correlated with GDP. And so you can basically say, here's how GDP has evolved over time and how we expect it to evolve into the future. Here's what the CO2 emissions in the past have been and what we expect them to be in the future. And you can calculate a number of dollars of GDP that is attributable to each ton of CO2, and you come up with a very high number in the thousands of dollars. Of course, it's just a correlation. It's not a causation per se. Then from there, you can compare that number to the social cost of carbon that's been calculated for federal government purposes of about $35 a ton. And it's not surprising that the number the ratio is huge. So in the case of a 5% discount rate, you've got a 220 to 1 ratio of benefits to costs. And so what the report is basically arguing is that almost no doubt, no matter what the discount rate you use and no matter what the assumptions you use, the social cost of carbon is so small as compared to the social benefits of carbon that it's basically irrelevant for decision making. The report is a long report. It's well over 100 pages. Lots of information, a lot of critiquing of the tools that are used in social cost of carbon literature. But in this case, I'm not even going to go there, because the basic tenor of the report and the arguments used in the report are just so strange. I mean, the idea that coal and carbon has been important to industrialization and to the development of our current economies is certainly not controversial. In fact, I would strongly recommend this particular book, Barbara Fries's Coal: A Human History, an excellent sort of analysis of how important coal has been and how important coal has been to the psychology of economic growth and economic development. Well worthwhile. But what this report does is then basically say, well, CO2 has been good to date, therefore more CO2 in the future is good in the future. And at the end of the day, this is just an obvious example of a correlation fallacy. And it is basically equivalent to saying that water is good for you, and therefore you can calculate your income divided by the pounds of water in your body, and you get $1 per pound, and that suggests that you should drink more water and increase the water content of your body. The only problem with that is that if you drink enough water, you're going to die. So you just can't do that kind of analysis, and any college economics student would not do that kind of analysis. So in terms of just from a basic analytical standpoint, having nothing to do with whether one agrees or disagrees about social costs of carbon, this report fails, which raises an interesting question as to where the report came from. And so just jumping for a second to the website of the American Coalition for a Clean Coal Electricity. It's a real organization. They list the report on their website. They list their members, and I thought it was interesting to take a look at a couple of those members, and many of them are quite well-known companies. This is just a few of their members. But then jumping to one in particular, Ameren, a utility which has a lot of information on environment and sustainability on its website and talking about climate change. And in fact, Ameren includes its Carbon Disclosure Project filings on the website, and the Carbon Disclosure Project filing is about a 90-page document full of information about Ameren and how it's thinking about climate change, et cetera, and a very positive picture, obviously. And in fact, Ameren is in the CDP report that was recently issued on the internal price of carbon, and Ameren reports using a $30 a ton price of carbon in 2025. So it's just really curious how members of that kind, with that kind, arguing that they are responding to climate change and supporting climate change in a variety of ways, have also funded this particular report, which just from a basic economics standpoint and a basic logic standpoint, really fails the test. And I thought that would be a useful piece of information. I hope that's been useful. Thanks very much.